The old bus creaked as it pulled up to the stop in the early morning haze, the kind of cold that sinks into your bones and doesn't let go easily. He stepped on carefully, his hands steady, despite the wear that life had carved into them. The faded veteran ID in his pocket, a quiet weight against his thigh. When he reached the driver, a younger man with tired eyes behind a thin veil of impatience, he quietly showed the card, hoping it would be enough. The veteran's voice was low but firm as he asked if he might ride without paying. The war had taken much from him, not least the steady income he no longer had. The driver's eyes flicked briefly over the ID, then hardened without a word, his response cutting sharper than the cold outside. No free rides, no exceptions, and a brusque order to leave the bus immediately. The old man stood there, the hum of the engine filling the sudden silence between them, his pride bruised but not broken, yet he could feel something else rising, an unbearable weight of rejection that had little to do with the money. He tried again, softer this time, explaining that his fixed pension barely covered rent and medicine, but the driver's patience had clearly run thin. He shook his head and repeated the command, gesturing sharply toward the door like a man dismissing a nuisance. The veteran hesitated for a moment, the sting of those few harsh words echoing louder than he expected, then slowly turned away, stepping down into the cold morning air with a heaviness that clung to him more tightly than the frost. Outside, the street was waking up. Cars rushing by, people crossing without a glance, life moving fast and indifferent. But for a moment, he stood still, caught between the world that had moved on and the one he had left behind. He pulled his coat tighter around his thin frame and reached for his phone, fingers trembling slightly, not just from the cold, but from something deeper stirring inside. As he dialed a number saved under a name he trusted, a quiet determination began to replace the ache, a subtle shift in the way he held himself. This was no longer just about a bus fare. It was about being seen, about the respect that had been quietly stripped away in a single, careless exchange. And though the morning was cold and the streets unforgiving, something else was beginning to stir, something that promised this was only the beginning of a story that needed to be told, even if no one wanted to listen just yet. He lingered at the edge of the bus door, the cold air pressing against his face, his breath coming out in quiet clouds, as he summoned the courage to try once more. His voice was steadier this time, stripped of any anger, only a simple request repeated with quiet insistence. Just a ride, a small kindness for a man who had given more than most ever could. The driver, however, didn't even meet his eyes. Without a flicker of hesitation, he shook his head sharply, his tone clipped and final, a firm refusal that left no room for discussion. The veteran's heart tightened, a knot of disbelief and shame twisting deep inside, a feeling so raw it was almost physical. He stepped back, the sting of rejection sharper than the cold morning air, and his hands clenched at his sides. For a moment, he just stood there, the hum of the bus engine and the city's distant noise swirling around him, suffocating in its indifference. The man who had once faced far worse in silence now found himself unable to swallow the bitterness alone. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers, the screen lighting up his weary face, and dialed a number etched into his memory. A friend, a brother in arms, who understood the weight of things left unsaid. When the call connected, the voice on the other end was calm but firm. "Let's settle this," came the quiet reply. The promise in that voice was unspoken but clear. This wasn't over, and it wouldn't be forgotten. The veteran waited, each passing minute thick with anticipation and an edge of something more, something heavier than just a dispute over a bus fare. Then, a sound in the distance, the unmistakable rhythm of boots on pavement, and his friend appeared. Not alone, but accompanied by a group of men moving with a purpose, a small company of 10, their faces set and familiar in a way only shared experience could forge. They approached the bus stop as one, a quiet but unmistakable force, the kind that turns heads and shifts the air without a word spoken. There was no violence in their steps, only a determined gravity that said this was a matter of principle, a reckoning long overdue. The driver saw them coming and something flickered in his eyes, a brief hesitation before the inevitable confrontation. The veteran stood among his friends, feeling the weight of their presence behind him. a shield and a statement all at once. The bus idled there, its doors open, but no longer inviting, caught in a moment charged with unspoken history and mounting tension. What would come next was uncertain, but the promise was clear. This was not simply a man asking for a free ride, it was a demand for dignity, for respect that had been eroded by callousness and indifference. The story was far from over, and waiting through the cold morning had revealed something greater than discomfort, a simmering storm of justice waiting to break. And anyone watching would soon understand why this moment mattered far beyond a single bus stop. So stay with it, because this story is just unfolding, and what happens next is worth every second of attention. Ed, the bus driver, looked up from his seat just as the group approached, and his expression changed almost instantly. Not to one of fear, but confusion followed closely by unease. The quiet authority in the way those 10 men carried themselves, the silent discipline in their steps, the unmistakable energy of men who had seen too much and spoken too little over the years, all of it bore down on him more powerfully than any shouting or threats ever could. He stood slowly, one hand still gripping the steering wheel as if grounding himself, and when they entered the bus without saying a word, the tension became almost physical. The veteran who had been turned away earlier stepped aside, letting his brothers in first, but he didn't lower his eyes. He didn't need to anymore. One of the men stepped forward, tall and broad-shouldered, his voice calm but weighty, the kind of voice that came from someone used to being obeyed, not out of fear, but respect. He didn't raise it. He didn't have to. "Do you know what this man's been through?" he asked, without venom, without pride, just quiet certainty. "Do you understand what it cost him to fight for a place that lets you sit here in warmth and judgment?" The driver opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came. The words hung in the stale air of the bus like smoke, and the silence that followed was louder than anything. Another veteran stepped in, his voice lower, more personal. "You don't have to know his name, but you damn well should respect the weight of that card he showed you." The driver started to nod, eyes darting between the faces, stern, calm, lined with age but not weakness. He stammered something about not knowing, about company rules, but his words collapsed in on themselves. No one interrupted him. No one had to. Eventually, the silence became unbearable even for him. "I'm sorry, he said quietly at first, then again louder, more desperate, like someone who realized too late that he had crossed a line he didn't even see. "I didn't mean any disrespect. I didn't know." But the first man shook his head gently, not in anger, but with a weariness that came from knowing how often apologies are offered only when confronted. "You shouldn't need to be told," he said. "That's the problem. And if you treat others like this, especially our elders, especially the ones who carried this country on their shoulders, it won't end well for you." The words weren't a threat. They were a fact. The driver finally stepped aside from the wheel, motioning for the old veteran to board. "Please," he said, his voice almost breaking, "wherever you need to go, I'll take you. No charge." The veteran looked at him for a long moment, not with gloating, not even anger, just a quiet, tired look that spoke of too many moments like this, too many battles fought outside the war zone. He nodded once and stepped inside, taking a seat slowly, his fellow veterans standing nearby, not to intimidate, but to accompany. As the bus pulled away, the tension didn't dissolve. It shifted, settled like dust after a long, hard wind. The passengers who had watched in silence finally exhaled, some with embarrassment, others with guilt, all now part of a moment they hadn't expected to witness. And somewhere in the back of the bus, a teenager looked up from his phone and watched the old man sit down, something unspoken changing in his eyes. The city rolled by outside, unchanged and indifferent. But inside that vehicle, a quiet ripple had started. Something real. Something remembered. And though this moment would fade from headlines, and though no cameras captured it, something was building beneath the surface. Not just for that veteran, but for every person who would later hear the story. Because this wasn't just about a bus ride. It was about the slow erosion of respect in a world that moves too fast to care, until someone makes it stop, and someone always does. So wait. What comes next, what builds from this, is bigger than one man's apology. It always is.